Welcome to the first ever episode of the Faithful Friends new podcast, The Mentoring Enthusiasts. We've been talking about this idea for a while, so we're super excited to see it finally coming together. I'll be hosting these two episodes, and my name is Tim Cowley. I'm the Director of Operations here at Faithful Friends, and I produce all of our media and communications pieces too. This podcast will probably look a little different from episode to episode. Sometimes Al Nodarse will be hosting, leading an interview remotely, or we might be bringing out some vintage interview content. For our first two episodes, recorded on November 9th at our makeshift office studio on Northeast Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, we'll be hearing from Drew Dyck. Also joining us is Chon Armsbury, one of our program coordinators, who also happens to be old friends with Drew. Drew and his wife Grace live up in Vancouver on the other side of the river and are in the mentoring match process right now. Now, Drew is an editor and author, and he recently released a new book called Just Show Up: How Small Acts of Faithfulness Change Everything. It's an especially relevant discussion for us in mentoring because we can often feel like we're not doing enough. We often put high expectations upon ourselves, and Drew helps ground us to reality. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, Drew, thanks for coming. This is great to have you here. First of all, loved your book.
Thank you.
I read it very quickly, which is another really nice thing.
It's a quick read.
You can sit down and like a day, 2 days, 3 days, you can be like, I'm done.
Yes.
I can add that to my list of books I've read this year.
I love it.
On Goodreads.
Because, I don't know if I'm the only one, but like when you see a book that is just like a doorstopper, like just a monster, it's daunting. You're like, should I start this? Do I have what it takes to finish it?
I have a bookshelf full of half-read books.
Right.
It's a book. I have bookmarks in every book on the shelf.
I hear you.
I used to read back out of college. I was like, I'm going to start reading because in college I hated reading what they told me to read. But then I started reading all these James Michener books.
Oh,
did you ever read his?
No, but
they were that thick.
Yeah,
they were those. Historical fiction, and
nice.
I read Alaska and Hawaii and Chesapeake and Iberia, and really, really good. And somehow I finished those books. But today, I'm not sure if it's my brain is changing with the phone.
Oh, I know mine is changing.
Yeah, like my attention span is like, okay.
Yeah,
there's a squirrel.
It sucks. Like even for me, I'm an author and an editor, but I'm like, if this thing's sitting there and I'm reading a book, it usually wins, right?
Does it take you longer to write a book now?
That's a good question. Well, this one was pretty short. Yeah, I don't know. This one was a slog, and that might have been part of it, to be honest. Right? Yeah, it's just that
it was a plod.
Yeah, it was a plod. That's right. And Grace turned my advice around on me, and she's like, "Well, just keep showing up, man. You'll get there eventually." So
I tell you, Grace is like the sage of wisdom.
She is a hero in this book, man.
It's very cool, and that I know her too. It's like, hey, I know her. It's all true.
I'll tell her she's getting famous.
That's right. But before we start talking about the book, we want to know more about you. How do people introduce you? How do you introduce yourself in the elevator or at a convention? Ooh. Or,
Is it Dr. Drew?
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. It sounds so good.
Yeah.
The alliteration. But no, unfortunately, I do not have a doctorate. But the way I introduce myself is I get it right out on the table, right off the bat. I'm Canadian. So, people can hold that against me. But I grew up in Canada. Moved down to the States. That's what we call it in Canada, the States, when I was, 22? I was coming down for 6 months to hang out with my brother Darren. You know Darren.
Yeah.
And here I am, 4 years later, because I married an American woman, Grace.
Uh-huh.
And here I am. And I threatened to move her back to the promised land, but thus far have not made good on that particular threat.
And so how did you get to know Chon? And Chon, I want to hear your background too a little bit, since we're listening to this in the audio, but we can't see you.
I can tell you my first memory, I think, is when he just showed up at the gym.
I like that.
On the Well basketball night, and just kicked all of our butts. Sorry, is that cussing?
It's not cussing, but it is a lie.
Well, no, it's not a lie. I was like, this guy can play. And then he didn't show up again. Injuries, that's what he said. We're all old.
I think I was sore for like a year after that.
Maybe that's right.
That might have been it. But
he didn't show up again. I was like, oh my gosh. I was thinking Darren's just okay at basketball, but But yeah, this guy Drew, he can play.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
That's
on
one of
record
the
now.
memories. That's one of the, I think, the first times I remember really like, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that basketball. That was a
Yeah.
long time ago. And so, yeah, we go to church.
The one time you came.
That's right. The one time I came, maybe I hit a couple shots and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Oh yeah.
Go out
yeah.
on a high note.
Yeah, it was a high note because that's we remember.
Yeah, and so Chon, tell me about yourself. We're here in let's just say we're in the Portland headquarters of Faithful Friends Mentoring Organization, and that means we are in your neighborhood. Tell us about this neighborhood, the physical location, your place and space and time here.
Yeah, I grew up pretty much, I don't know, 10, 15 blocks down the street. This was the area I grew up in. Often would ride bikes with friends in this area and hang out at the park down the street and play basketball and all that sort of stuff as a kid. I just remember the city just felt like it was ours. These streets, as busy as they are today, were not busy back in the 70s and 80s when I was a kid. And I felt like we just owned the city.
That's awesome. And so how do you know Drew then? Is it from this basketball get-together?
Well, a little bit more than that. We attend the same church together, the Well Community Church, which is pretty much across the street from the house I grew up on first in Hancock, if that's okay to say addresses. But folks moved, my mom and her family moved from Louisiana in 1940. My grandpa came to work on the railroads. And she pretty much lived in that house from 1940. She moved away, obviously, when she got married and had a family. But I grew up in that house 1972, and she sold the house in 2013. So the house was in our family for, let me do the math, 73 years.
Wow.
Yeah, an old 1891 Victorian house.
See, I love that you're a native Northwesterner because they're very rare, right?
Yeah, pretty rare. Yeah.
And everyone rips on the Californians for coming up and making everything so expensive. But then I say, where are you from? And it's like, oh, some other state.
Yeah.
You're a transplant too. But
Yep.
here we have a legitimate
native. I've seen all the changes in the area. Not all of them, obviously. Mom can tell those stories. But it was just a unique experience growing up in this area, and just a very diverse community, mostly a black community. And but my neighbors were also Tlingit natives from Alaska and from the Dominican Republic right to our right. And folks down the street were from Cambodia, and just a very diverse community, which I just really appreciated growing up in.
Tell me a little bit about why are you at Faithful Friends? What's your mentoring journey?
Yeah, sometime back after finishing college, I had this real heart to go into teaching, and so that was kind of my road, that was my path. And my mom was a teacher over at King Elementary School, right around the corner from here. And there was this presentation about this new mentoring program called Friends of the Children. This is 1993 or 94. And at that point, I was doing some prereqs to get into a graduate teaching program. And she said, oh, well, there's this great program. You could get a little experience working with kids. And at that point, I'd had a little experience coaching track and field, mostly in Eugene during college. And this program sounded really neat. And so I called the program manager at the time, Mike Forsley, and he said, well, come on in for an interview. And well, that was 1994, and I thought, okay, I'll just do this for about maybe a year or two. And that year or two turned into 24 years.
Oh, wow.
And, it really satisfied that desire to teach, but at an intimate level. So the world is the classroom. When you're a mentor at Friends of the Children, you have 10 youth that you mentor full-time. With Friends of the Children, they select kids in kindergarten, and you walk with them all the way through high school. And so I had a group of 8 guys that I started with, and then got a new group of guys. And so I think altogether there was probably 32 kids, about 32 kids that were assigned to me over the years. And those kids now range in age from, I think, 14. I was the youngest that before I left Friends of the Children in 2019. He's 14 now, and then the oldest is just turned 38, which is, I'm not even 38.
Sure.
But really, just that love of just spending time with kids. Again, just the different hats you wear every day. You could be a scientist one day, and the next day you're a basketball coach, a guidance counselor. And so it really I just loved that. I loved being able to mix things up every day, create my own schedule, meet kids where they're at, and just spend time and just love on them. build that relationship with them. And so that was Friends of the Children. And so I left Friends of the Children in 2019, and I started thinking, oh man, what am I going to do next? And so I kind of created this list of organizations that I admired. I had question marks, like things like, oh, maybe I want to be a physical therapy advisor, or not advisor, assistant. And so I ended up going to a kind of an informational on that, and then I crossed that one out. And then sometime in about June 2019, the executive director at Faithful Friends, who I worked at with at Friends of the Children, he came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do some contract work with us?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." And so I did that for about 6 months. And then sometime in January 2020, he says, "Hey, we really need someone full time." And I was like, man, I really am enjoying this side of things. I'm not mentoring kids anymore, but I'm mentoring the mentors and overseeing the matches. And I think I signed on February 1st, and maybe about 10 days later, we kind of shut things down with the pandemic. But yeah. So we can talk about that if you want later.
And I remember biking with you and you telling me about Faithful Friends.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, this is like a big change for you after having so many years at Friends of the Children, and then having something similar, but a little bit different because we just use mentors that are from local churches.
Yeah.
Although, of course, the kids aren't. They can be from anywhere. But it's... then that kind of was on my radar, and then I got to know another biking friend, Seth, who was
a mentor,
and still is. And so it's just like, well, there's some pretty cool stuff happening, but it's in my own backyard. So how cool can it be if it's right in your own backyard?
Right.
And then you start realizing, yeah, it is. This is actually amazing. What's happening here. And then what's your connection with Faithful Friends and with mentoring, Drew?
Yeah, actually, it's funny, we're in the process right now. It's really exciting working with Sia of getting a mentee. Is that the correct name for it?
Yeah.
And so it's been great just to go through the process, and we're excited about it. So many people in our church, as you know, including you and CJ and my brother, and have been part of it, and it's just an awesome experience by all accounts. And so, yeah, we're excited. That's our connection. But yeah, we heard about it through the church.
It's really cool that the main elder at the well, CJ Coffey, is also a mentor, and that makes a big difference for someone to be up in front of folks and say, "Hey, I really believe in this," and then go out and do it himself.
Yeah, it's an amazing example. So Drew, that's a little bit about your background and Chon's background, and you guys knowing each other. And so now we got this book that has just come out. How did you get into writing? Why did you get into writing? Why did that become your career path?
Yeah, so I was a poor student in high school. I was more into playing basketball and just goofing around. But I actually I read my first book all the way through when I was 18 years old, after graduating from high school. I'd gotten through high school barely, just reading bits and pieces and watching movies. Anyway, but I remember just being like deeply impacted by it and being like, wow, they were like nonfiction Christian books, and they just kind of like deepened my relationship with God. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And almost immediately I started churning out these kind of sappy devotionals that were very much like the books I was reading, but not as good. And I just had this desire to kind of communicate with people about God. I didn't know how that would look. And of course, it took years beyond that before I was able to do that. But I just had a real love for the written word. And, and I feel privileged to be able to get to do what I do today. And I'm an author and editor, so I'm working with words all the time. But even in this kind of visually dominated age, I feel like God's still changing people through the medium of the written word. And so I feel privileged to be able to wake up every day and do that. But yeah, so, and I was, I worked on magazines and websites for Christianity Today and a few other places as an editor. And now I work in book publishing. And then on the weekends, in the evenings, try to write my own books. How
long, let's talk about this book, Just Show Up.
Just Show Up.
And what's the tagline in this book here?
Oh man, you're going to test me. How small acts of faithfulness change everything. Although I got like 2 subtitles.
Very good.
Oh yeah, a guide for exhausted Christians.
Oh, there we go. That's me.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
I was
Several.
thinking the other day, if this was written for an Australian audience, I don't know if it would even exist, because they already set the bar so low that they're like, yeah, we're not trying to save the world.
Yes.
So, and probably the Brits
It's never
as
going
well.
to take off in Australia.
But in
Onto something
America,
there.
we can change the world, and we know it. We're growing up. We're like, we're going to do it. We're going to do that thing.
Yes.
So what was the concept behind why you wrote this one? And tell us, is this a series, part of a series, or is it just kind of a one-off?
Yeah, it's a one-off. What precipitated the idea for me, it might have been a bit of a midlife crisis. I was remembering back to when I was in my 20s, going to seminary, and Grace and I, my wife, Grace, we were very idealistic. We had these kind of grandiose plans about what we were going to do for God. And I think that was good. It's good to have those kind of big plans and hopes. But I remember talking to her too and saying, like, listen, I don't want the American dream. We're not going to live in the suburbs. We're never going to have to make more than $30,000 a year. Whoops. But let's let other people have the 2.5 children and live in the suburbs. We're going to do something different. Well, here I am. And you guys are already smiling because you know my situation. I am in the suburbs. I drive a minivan. I have 3 children, not 2.5. And so the question kind of became, okay, God, and I'm not complaining. My life has turned out great. But when it turns out differently than you envisioned it, what now? Like, what does faithfulness mean, right? And I remember, too, Grace asking me right before I wrote this book to just list the people that I admired. And as I did, I had a realization that, like, not one of these people changed the world in some big, spectacular fashion. They weren't even especially talented, but they were faithful. One was a small church pastor who kept leading his church in spite of having a debilitating illness. Another one served in a soup kitchen. And I just realized, like, why do I admire these people? Because they were faithful. Even when life punched them in the face, they kept coming back. They kept showing up. And so that kind of became like a little mantra for me. Like, okay, Drew, you're tired, you're discouraged, just show up. Just do the next small thing in front of you. And then I think the cool thing about that is when we do that, God can do amazing things through it. But I've decided it's his job to change the world. I just want to be faithful in the small things.
Was there a process of disappointment or sadness that you didn't do that thing that you thought was going to change the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of slowly dawned on me. It's like, oh, wow, I thought I was going to go overseas and, maybe do a nonprofit and I realized the particular subculture of evangelicalism that I grew up in really prioritized that.
Yeah.
And there's a good side to that, but it's kind of like, okay, listen, if you're serious about your faith, you want to do something for God, you got to be a missionary. If there's something wrong with you, maybe you can be a pastor. Okay, that's like the B team. That's the JV. And then everyone else, it wasn't said explicitly like that, but I think we kind of got that message. And then, like me, I'm not technically in like vocational ministry, right? And so you kind of go, wow, okay, it took some time, I think. It was a gradual kind of dawning realization where you go, no, God's working through what I'm doing, through what we're all doing, especially as we kind of seek to obey him through it. And so it took a while to kind of get that message into my bones. But I think it's a really freeing one when you realize, yeah, I don't have to, go in this particular path in order to do something that matters for God, nor do I have to do something big and daring and dramatic to fulfill God's call on my life, that I can be faithful by showing up for the people around me.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that background of having that constant input. The missionaries are the amazing people that do all these things. And Chon, did you grow up in that kind of background where you were like, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to do something for Jesus?
No, I did not grow up in a church home, and I was probably one of the ones that needed the help, honestly. Our family always had the toy and joy makers show up at the door with all of our toys, so there was no Santa Claus. There was no big Christmas days, like no elaborate Christmas decorations and any of that stuff. We were pretty poor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, no ideas of changing the world. I think that really... I would say my first experience of kind of seeing that was when I was in high school. I was a junior in high school, and I had just joined the cross country and track team, and I was finding a little bit of success. And so going into my senior year, I was like, man, like I'm actually, if I train, I could do pretty good. And so I started training that summer, and I decided to take two boys who were going to be freshmen at the same high school that lived in my neighborhood. And all of us were all just poor kids in the neighborhood. And I said, well, hey, why don't you guys just come run with me? And so they joined me on my runs, and they also tried out for the cross-country team. And cross-country, I don't know how to say this, but traditionally, at least in Oregon, has been a white sport. And so to have two young men who are both black join the cross-country team, that was like, okay, wow. At the time, though, the state champion was black. Is from Vincent High School, Peter Pritchett, an amazing runner. But anyway, so they
and now
joined
it's
the team.
all the Somali and Kenyan refugee.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
kids.
the best runners in the world are from those places. But anyway, I took these two guys under my wing, and every race they were first and second. Every single race, one of them was first, the other one was second. And I remember going to the awards party after the season ended, and one of the young men, his mom came up to me and said, Chon, I just want to thank you. You totally changed his life. And I was like, what? It was such an awkward thing. I had no idea that I was doing that.
Wow.
It was completely, I didn't know what to say to her. I barely looked at her. I think I just walked away. But it was when I look back, that was my first experience in mentoring and my first experience in helping change the trajectory of someone's, at least current life.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And it was like finding someone that was interested in something that you were already doing, that you're like, hey, we can do this together and we can encourage one another. And it wasn't like this.
That's the real hardened picture of mentoring, really.
Yeah.
I'm doing something, you're coming alongside, and hey, what are you doing there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not taking them to Oaks Park every day.
Right.
You're not doing something that's just, full of money or time investment. This is just something simple.
Yeah, and helping a kid find their spark. And so during that year, I just found something that sparked him, and he was a hard worker, and so, or both of those guys were, and they took it, and there was no complaining. There was no internet back in those days, and so we spent our time running through the neighborhoods.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to start going through some of the things that struck me about your book, things that resonated, things that I thought are worth talking about a little bit more. So it's kind of going through chronologically. That way, if someone's listening to it, they might be also able to find these things. And I'll try to reference the page number as well. Sorry for Kindle readers, but the printed page is best. So what do you think is wrong with this American lifestyle of busyness? Man, that's so hard to answer because it's so multifaceted. But observations that you've had have come across in this book.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when it comes to I'd maybe put it as busyness or constantly being distracted or inundated with entertainment and technology, is it can kind of numb you. To the people around you, to the fulfilling the call God's placed on your life. And I feel this myself. It's hard for me to go anywhere without my phone. I don't think I'm alone here, right? I remember going to I was at Chipotle. I'm sitting in line, and all of a sudden I make the horrifying realization that I don't have my phone with me. And I'm like, man, am I going to have to actually talk to someone? And I got 10 minutes here where I can't listen to a podcast or read something or scroll on social media. And it's just incredible. And it's funny because I heard someone say, it's so weird. I have the best ideas in the shower. It's yeah, that's because it's the only place you don't actually have your phone.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so when we allow, especially technology, to crowd into every area of our life, first of all, as a Christian, it's concerning because it's hard to commune with God. And I've found, since, I'm online or on my phone too much, it's more difficult to concentrate. We were talking about this before as far as reading. That's harder, especially long form reading. Prayer becomes harder. Reading my Bible is tougher. And I think, too, it affects the way that we relate to each other. So I think sometimes we think of it as okay, maybe I'm wasting too much time on my phone. But I think there are actually bigger issues than that. And that is that it can actually jeopardize the way that we relate to each other and to God. I don't know if that's too heavy or too big, but I see that as sort of a problem that maybe we don't appreciate how challenging it really is for our time and space. And it's something that's unique. People didn't have to deal with this 100 years ago, right? Even 20 years ago, not nearly as much. And of course, I think we're Gen Xers here. So we remember well life before the internet. And like the meme goes, man, am I ever glad I grew up before the internet.
Yes.
So anyway, that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I think that's a big concern these days, is just making sure, and it's a challenge daily for me, even to put down my phone so I'm present for my children, right? It's so easy to check out. at the slightest kind of hint of boredom that, man, if we can kind of carve out areas of our life where tech isn't in our hands all the time, we're not always plugged in, man, that's huge.
Yeah. And as a new mentor myself, I've been taking along my new mentee to places, and he's 10, really into TikTok, which obviously lets us know that nobody actually checks any age verification stuff. They don't care. They don't care at all.
No.
But he's so into it that he would watch this constantly in the car when we're going somewhere. And, I don't want to be like a jerk and, ask him to put it away or something. But eventually I had to. I was like, hey, man, let's put this in the glove box, and you can have it later. And he's like, cool, whatever. He didn't throw a hissy fit or anything. And then the last 3 times we went out together, he didn't bring his phone at all. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I don't know if his dad talked to him or what. Turned out later that it was a grounding thing, so he just couldn't have it because of some things. But it was the best time that we had together because he wasn't looking for it. He wasn't just scrolling, randomly watching videos, and he was present,
Yes.
which was just amazing. And it's a good picture for me. My kids are actually better at this than me because we raised them overseas in rural Africa. And so they didn't have technology like people here did. And they're a little bit older too. So we still, I think, had that time together where we didn't have to be dealing with this all the time because we didn't have Wi-Fi in the house. We didn't have, the ability to even check the internet half the time. So, yeah, I kind of feel like it's, Drew, I think of guys your age that are trying to do the right thing, trying to raise kids. Have you guys come up with some principles that you...
I was just going to say, that's it. We're moving to rural Africa.
Let me say it's a little bit different now because there is access to this kind of stuff, even in rural places like that, which is crazy. Maybe they're not, on it as much as we are. But I have so many friends on Facebook now that are like, make $1 a day and live in rural Africa, but they WhatsApp me all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's just amazing. My in-laws, who are Bible translators from the jungles of Brazil, they've got friends all the time that are contacting them through Facebook, and it's like, it's crazy that this is like someone that wears a loincloth in the jungle, goes out to the city, and he's on Facebook.
Yeah. And would never have a car, but has a phone.
Yes.
Yes. No, it's a constant challenge, man. I didn't anticipate how much it would be. And we're kind of weirdos, as my kids have informed me, because my son, he's almost 12, and he's like, hey, all the people in my class have a phone. I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy, you ain't getting one. And I thought he was exaggerating. Then I go look at the stats, and it's like 3/4 of the kids that age have a phone. And I'm going, wow, yeah, that's okay. I'll be a weird parent on this one. We're holding out. And yet it's still a struggle because he's constantly grabbing mine or Grace's. And then, of course, there's TV. And when, unlike your mentee, when we take the phone away from them, they absolutely freak out. And so it's a constant battle, man. But I think it's worth having and trying to rein in, because those, especially when you're in your formative years, if you're constantly in front of a screen, that can't be good. I know it isn't. I've seen the studies, but
I think kids can sometimes lose that inability to really engage the world and navigate the world. And one example I have is a kid got in the car once and he didn't have his phone, and immediately he says, "I'm bored." And I'm like, what do you mean, man? We're about to go to the festival and do all these amazing things. And he just couldn't do it without his phone. And I thought that was really sad. But once we got to the festival, everything was okay. And I did remind him later. I said, look at the great time that we had. But us Gen Xers, us people born, at a certain time, we remember long car trips where we just had to look out the window and faith in our head and our minds.
We were bored constantly.
Yeah, but we came up with great ideas. We were able to negotiate and do get all these wonderful skills. And so it's, I think technology is an amazing thing, but also it can be,
certainly has its drawbacks. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and we, even with Faithful Friends, we kind of made that decision to go off of Facebook and Instagram. As the guy that had to put up those posts, it was a lot less work for me, which is great because my role changed, and now it's like I have all this other responsibility. But it also felt like a good move because it's like, you know what, we don't need to be on this treadmill. We don't need to be playing into the system. If we agree that for kids this is not healthy, then why do we need to be on it as adults trying to then promote what we're doing with kids when it's
Oh, man.
not that they're looking
Yeah.
at it. No one's on Facebook. That's a young
No,
kid,
that's me.
and good for them.
Good boomer thing, yeah.
But yeah, it just felt like this is a purposeful thing we can do to try to just be present with people, which is part of the DNA of our organization. We want that presence. We want that, that face-to-face time that's in person. Chon, how was that during COVID? What did you see for the mentors and mentees during that time?
Yeah, I in all the years I've worked with kids, I've never seen kids so depressed because of that lack of real connection. You go to school and you connect with kids. That's a place where there's not even much technology there. You're just connecting with kids your age and building social relationships. And saw a lot of kids that were really depressed. I showed up at a kid's house and he just looked miserable. But our mentors really came through. The world, so much was shut down, but our mentors just did a fantastic job of connecting in the ways they could, whether that was, again, through technology, which is an amazing thing, being able to FaceTime them, Zoom, whatever you call it, but also lots of our mentors just stopped by the kids' houses and dropped off things for them, like cookie ingredients, and FaceTimed them later and said, hey, let's make these cookies together. You're at your house, I'm at mine, but let's do that. So just wonderful ways. One mentor, a family had COVID, and she went over and dropped off stuff for them and really just ministered to them. And I thought, I thought our mentors just did a great job of staying connected in a very, very challenging and difficult time.
And that makes me think of loneliness, the loneliness epidemic that we talk about that seems to be something that a lot of Western countries face. Page 17, you talk about this, and I love this quote because it's so spot on. But, what if we started showing up for people who were lonely, desperate, and hurting? It would mean fewer people slipping through the cracks, more people feeling welcomed and loved. There would be less depression and alienation, fewer suicides and incidents of violence, no abandoned children, no neglected friends. Destructive generational patterns would be interrupted, and whole communities would begin to heal. That's an amazing vision of possibility. And how do you see that? How do you see us making that a reality in our culture?
Yeah, and it sounds big and grandiose, right? It's changing the world. But I think the cool thing about it is those powerful impacts or effects would come from very small things. That is, parents being present for their children. When you see someone who, like Chon was talking about, if there's a kid who's feeling depressed or anxious, you come alongside them and help, right? It's so easy just to kind of walk past people's problems, especially in our culture. And like you said, it's more of a problem in the Western world. Definitely, because we're far more individualistic. We kind of are comfortable just kind of minding our own business. You just think of how the suburbs are set up. You kind of come in, you can open your garage, put your car in, you don't have to see anyone. I love the way, who was it? Someone recently was talking about, in the Western world, we're back deck people, whereas in other parts of the world, often it's front porch people, right? But that can be very lonely and alienating. So if we're intentional about not ignoring people's problems, sometimes getting into people's business a little bit, it's incredible the ripple effects that can have. And so that's exciting to me. And because sometimes it can feel like, okay, well, what does this matter if I mentor this kid, or if I'm there for my family or for my community, if I volunteer at my church? It has an incredible impact, especially if a lot of people start doing it. So that's something that kind of got me excited as I started to think about this topic. Like showing up for people in person, preferably, has a huge impact. And again, we saw that in the pandemic. Like we were all connected virtually. I don't think, most of us had phones and computers, and yet rates of anxiety, loneliness, depression shot through the roof because we need those in-person interactions. It just showed how crucial that is.
Chon, growing up in Portland in a traditionally African-American community, was the front porch the thing back then? Was that the culture of that time period, or do you feel like it was even at that time more back deck kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I would say definitely front porch. We spent a lot of time on the front porch. We didn't even have a big front porch, but we would sit on the steps all the time, and people would walk by, and we knew folks that walked by. And I remember even my first experiences with Friends of the Children, same thing. I would go to families' homes, and if they were sitting on the porch, I was going to sit on the porch with them. and have a 40, and just kidding. Just joking about that. But really,
a 40-ounce Slurpee, yeah.
I'm inviting myself, a 40-ounce Slurpee. I'm inviting myself to dinner. I think that so many good conversations can happen in that space. I was going to talk also just about the small acts of faithfulness and how, I remember a number of years ago, there was a guy that was really upset about all these things that were happening in the world, and he wanted to solve this and he wanted to solve that. And I just remember looking at him and I just said, that sounds really exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're amazing at connecting your community. You've done so many wonderful things. And I said, that's where it's at, man. It's just those first start in your own heart.
Yeah.
And then with your family and your own home. And then you can, impact your neighbors around you and your small community around, the Portland area. And that's not to say don't go tackling global climate change and some of those things. Somebody maybe has to do those big jobs, but I think for most of us, it's those small acts of really loving on your neighbors and in your community.
Man, I love that. I couldn't put it better. And here's the cruel irony. I think sometimes when you're focused on the macro problems, like, okay, you're all worked up about the next presidential debate or some global crisis or something, that's great. Those are important things, but you almost have zero influence on them. Right. And the irony is that sometimes you get so obsessed with those big problems that you're ignoring needs in your real backyard. Right. You spend all your time like thinking about national politics and you don't even vote in your local election. Right. You don't even or you're like, worried about, some tragedy overseas and there are people in your neighborhood that are in need that you're walking past. And so, man, that's huge. And it's easy to underestimate the potential that your actions in your vicinity actually have on the world as they ripple out. So, yeah, that's a good word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of small acts of things that you're doing in your community, this gets us into the plotting idea. When I was reading that, I wondered if there was actually this thing called the plotting principle, and I don't know, is that a thing?
I think you just coined it.
Yeah, I think you coined it because it came into my head when, but I started.
I'm stealing it though.
I love
you
it.
should. I mean, it's got the P and the P and is that an alliteration or something like that?
Yeah, alliteration, man.
PP.
Pastors will love it.
They will. and I think I Googled and ended up somehow on Doug Wilson's website. I've never been to his website before, but I was like, oh, I know of this guy. And
Douglas Wilson from Moscow, Idaho?
Yep. And yes, there's a lot that can be said one way or the other, but he talks about how, he just plods along and he does things slowly and methodically. And it's just a great reminder that, hey, if you want to write a book, I mean, did you go to a coffee shop and spend 2 weeks in a coffee shop writing a book?
No.
How did you write a book?
It's plotting. Yeah, absolutely. Like with anything in life that you accomplish or that it ends up being meaningful, it takes that plotting approach, I think. And it's a hard message for us because we do go online and you see people that seem to be blowing up on Instagram or being overnight successes. And of course, half the time that's an illusion or you're just seeing the highlights from people's lives. But honestly, like what leads to a life of meaning and impact is that slow plodding approach to life where you're just, okay, I know this isn't going to add up to much today or this week or even this month, but over time it makes a huge impact. And yeah, writing this book was a slog, honestly. And yeah, Grace turned around my advice on me. She's like, hey, just keep showing up. Because I remember coming back from Starbucks and like I'd been there for a few hours and I had like a few hundred words and I didn't like any of them. And and yet if you commit, okay, man, I'm just going to do this for an hour every day, and I don't have a ton of time. I can't, go out to a remote cabin or something and leave my life. It's like I got to do it in between work and kids and all the rest of it. But just that consistency over time yields results. And incidentally, for any, prospective book writers out there, you don't write a book, you just write an article and then you write 12 of them or however many chapters there are, right? Because it's too daunting to think of writing an entire book, at least for me. But if you can kind of break it down and just show up every day and do the work, and I think that's true in writing and true in life. So, what I talk about in the book too is William Carey, father of modern missions, right? I won't even go through all the things he did. It's just incredible. He has these orphanages and he translates the Bible into all these languages and just an incredible guy. And yet he's got this great quote where he's like, I have no special talent, but I can plod. I thought, man, that's awesome. If you can plod, that God can really use that.
Chon, what do you plod? How do you plod? What have you plotted in?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that all of my time at Friends of the Children was applaud. Because I think sometimes we want to see the immediate result. We do something and we want, oh, there it is. Look what I just did. And that's just not the case in relationships. I mean, relationships are wild. They're just ups and downs and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so when you mentor a kid, if someone was mentoring me, they would experience the same thing, the wild ups and downs of life. And, it's just the long game. It's a marathon. I know that's very cliche-ish, but it's not a sprint. And so
it's a 3-day hike around Mount Hood.
That's right. Yeah, but again, I think early on my expectation was like, I'm in this kid's life. Well, he's going to attend, University of Oregon. He's probably going to give the graduation speech, and that's all great. And if that happens, that's wonderful. And I'm just as impacted by the kid who has had the ups and downs, and it's hard and things are tough. I'm sticking in there with them through the years. And one of the stories I can think of is a kid who I mentored at Friends of the Children. He probably won't be listening to this podcast, but he had it tough. There were some tough times. And sometime when he was about 16 or 17, he and his family ended up moving out of state. And my thought was, I didn't really make much of an impact on him. And I had mentored him from the time he was in 6th grade. It's about 5 or 6 years. And so that was 16 or 17. He moved away. I lost all contact with him. There was no Facebook contact, nothing. And sometime when he was 21 or 22, I just get this phone call. And I'm sitting in the parking lot waiting for another kid that I mentored up in Vancouver. And I just said hello. And he said, hey, he gave me his name. And I just said, oh, hey, man, I haven't talked with you forever. And then he said, I just wanted to call and say thank you. And, I'm taking care of my baby. I've got an apartment. I've got a job. And it's because of all the things that you had taught me. And I was like crying. He couldn't see that I was crying, but tears were just flowing down. And I had no idea. Again, I thought I just had no impact. And it's just not true, And, so, we don't even have much contact anymore, but that phone call was impactful for sure. It was applaud, and it's still applaud.
And I wonder how many kids don't call you and thank you that still had that same experience and impact. That kid actually did call you.
Yeah, the thing I tell mentors all the time is this work is an act of faith. You may not see results at all. You probably will, because there's the smiles and the hugs that come along in relationships that are just, and sometimes kids will draw pictures for you, and those are all really cool things. But you may not see the impact, maybe ever, maybe 10, 15 years down the line, and that's okay, because like you said in the book, it's an audience of one. You're doing this as one simple act of faith. It's one way you can express your faith in God and your relationship with God is by showing up in this kid's life over and over, and you may never see the results, but there's always something there. I tell mentors all the time, you are making some sort of difference. You may never know. Maybe you will know, but either way, it's an act of faith, and you're doing good.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And you're right, it's the long game, right? You can't, okay, I'm going to have this amazing impact today on this kid. Well,
everybody wants to see that graduation speech, or, look at my, the kid I'm mentoring, he's the MVP of the, the football league this year. And that's all great. Those things feel great, and if it doesn't happen, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. I just want them to think I'm cool.
But unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
I know that
Hate
to break it to you. But
suburbs,
you can play basketball.
Suburbs and polo shirts aren't.
Minivans. Yeah,
minivans. No, they will think you're cool.
Oh, thank you
sometimes.
For lying. Yes. My kids don't, so,
Right.
At least not yet. But
not yet.
Later
Someday.
They're going to look back. We hope you've been enjoying this conversation between Drew and Chon and me, and we're going to stop it here so that we can pick this up again in the next episode when you'll continue to hear from Drew discussing Just Show Up, how small acts of faithfulness change everything. If you'd like to learn more about Faithful Friends, Hit us up on our website at www.faithfulfriendspdx.org, or the little short URL there is ffpdx.org. And definitely send us a note if you are enjoying this podcast. We'd love to hear your comments. Take care.